Gentlemen, welcome. The transfer window's shut. We've had several hours to digest it, to meander through who's gone where and who's done what. Tim, anybody jump out at you? Any club that stands out for you that seems to have done a tidy bit of business in this?
At this moment in time, I think Tottenham have been very productive. The reason I say this moment in time, I think if they was to lose players to the European market, which is still open, the likes of Eriksen, Alderweireld, Wanyama, not so much, Danny Rose, I think that their good work, what they've done in the transfer market, might be undone. You know, there's no guarantees with the boys. Every transfer is, Gary would tell you as well, whenever you sign a player, there always could be a risk. When you're bringing them in from foreign countries who had never played in the Premier League before, and then you're putting them into a team, there's no guarantee they're going to hit the floor running. Now, Tottenham are coming from there. I mean, they're well below at the moment, Man City and Liverpool, as every other club are. But without going mad in the transfer market over certainly last two, they haven't signed anyone. But they've solidified that top four spot. Now, what is success for Tottenham? I would suggest that is pretty much good success. Now, when you end up spending over £100 million on new players, it comes with expectation. The fans start expecting a little bit more. The manager gets put under a little bit more pressure. Pochettino is one of the best managers in the Premier League. He's done a great job up to now. Now, I think the switch is on a little bit of the pressure. Now he has to deliver a trophy, without doubt. Champions League final, beyond Tottenham fans' belief last season, they didn't win it. You have to win trophies, and I think now he will realise that the pressure is on him. Now he's spent the money. And contrary to what he said a couple of weeks ago when he's saying, you should call me a coach, I'm not interested, I don't bring in the players. I think it's quite evident with the players what he's brought into the club, a lot of Argentinian interest there as well, that he is heading up the recruitment.
What about from a manager's point of view, Gary, when it has finished and you've probably spent the last day or two and it's gone bonkers or it's been relatively quiet, is it nice to get beyond it and basically know who you've got and what you've got to work with for the following few months?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like Tim says, I mean, you've still got that uncertainty of the European market still being open. So you could still lose some players. But I think, you know, you're hoping to get the players that you want. You know that to a certain degree your season could depend on which signings you make. So to have got them over the line or not got them over the line really is going to define how you feel. And if you've made some good signings, like a lot of the clubs have done, then of course you know that you've got some key ingredients to work with for the season. And it's so hard at Premier League level, isn't it? You know, you see them to make some of these signings, to get some of these deals over the line, must take an incredible amount of work, just because there's so many people involved. You know, there's so many agents involved. The clubs have so many different people involved. You know, each Premier League club will have so many people involved in the transfer dealings. You know, so to have been so much key deals, I think has been a positive. Some clubs have done more than others, and some clubs I think have needed to do more than others.
Out of what we've seen over the course of the transfer window, maybe even today, is there a deal that jumps out at you that perhaps is the most surprising? I mean, there's a couple of...
Yeah, there is for me, I'd have to say the one I was most surprised at when I heard it was the David Luiz deal. You know, Chelsea to Arsenal. Not that Arsenal don't need David Luiz. I think they do. They certainly need to strengthen in the centre-back area. He's a proven winner in the Premier League. He's won multiple Premier League titles. He is a winner wherever he's gone. He's a certain type of player. He's not that typical... I know I don't want to go back to the Bold and Adams, they're still where they were at their most success. I mean, he's far more extravagant.
They're the benchmark, though, really, aren't they, from a defensive point of view?
Absolutely, or on a modern-day Maguire or Cahill, who was available from Chelsea. That would have made a little bit more sense. But you have to say, the manager knows him. Unai Emery has worked with him at PSG. So he knows all about him. He obviously feels that he can bring him into Arsenal and he can help strengthen them. I think that he will. Tierney is a very good prospect. When you strip his game down, he's got all the attributes to be a top player. He's never done it at this level for a consistent basis. The Premier League is unforgiving. You cannot make any mistakes because you get punished for every mistake. In Scotland, with respect, you can. Certainly when you play for Celtic. Now, I think it's a good signing. I think he's of a good age. I think he's still willing to develop. He's with a very good manager in Unai Emery. They're building a good squad there at Arsenal. Let's get it right. They've got great firepower. They've got fantastic midfield players. Ceballos is a great player they brought in there on loan. Gives them a little bit more guile. And then you start asking questions where Ozil will fit into that. I think it's an ill-balanced squad, but I think with the acquisitions what they've made, I think they're stronger.
Do you echo that sentiment, Gary? Because it did seem for a long time it was all about the defence, yet in comes another attacking player, which Tim mentioned earlier on. As neutrals, we're all sat there going, this is going to be absolutely fantastic. But if you're an Arsenal fan, you're possibly having kittens at a certain stage.
Well, that's the thing that intrigues me about their business. I mean, if you look at, over the past couple of years, every now and then you look at Arsenal as a team, and they've got great ability. They've added to the forward line in terms of the goals. They've scored quite a few goals last season. And you looked at the spine from time to time, and you just always felt they needed a Fernandinho type in midfield. They maybe needed a stronger centre-back physically, just to give those flair players that little bit of security and that little bit of solidity. So they brought in David Luiz. So it's a really bizarre one. I mean, he is a top player, but he probably doesn't fit that type of mould. One of the bits of business that they've done, Martinello, 18-year-old Brazilian, I've seen a little bit of him, and he's got great abilities, very, very quick, very direct, makes a lot of runs off the back. His movement is really, really good. And he scores goals and he can't defend. He's a centre-half. And he's a really good player. So it'll be interesting to see whether he backs up the forward line that they've got at the moment. But the one deal I was most surprised with, I think, it's probably one that has slipped under the radar a little bit, was Moise Kean from Juventus that Everton signed. I thought that was an amazing deal for me because at 19, I think, years old, played quite a bit for Juventus last season. Big, strong, powerful
people wax
player.
lyrically about him, don't they? Yeah. Across the board, you're thinking, well, how come, if he's that good, why let him go?
Which draws up, is there a reason why they have let him go? Maybe there is. Maybe there's something there that we don't know about. But you think a team like Juventus surely wouldn't let a young player of that much potential, unless they perhaps feel he's not going to play as much as they'd like, and maybe then there's a chance for him to move on. But I think it's a great deal.
Is that perhaps the key reason when you look at the Luiz deal about why he's moved on, considering everything in the garden looked really rosy only, about a week ago, and it's all changed? Apparently there's been a discussion with Frank Lampard about where he fits in the pecking order. Yeah. And does he have the type of clout of being a footballer that's won things, and probably the age that he is to say, if that's the case, it might be a quick turnaround, but I've got to go somewhere where I'm going to play? Yeah,
I think it's the best thing for both parties. I think Frank would have been very honest with him and said, look, David, you're not going to play every week. I see these couple of players ahead of you. And he probably had a disagreement with him and said, I'd rather move on. And it all got turned around very, very quickly. We don't know. We're in a space of a week or two. Looks like Arsenal have been contacted. So like I say, Emery knows all about him, showed him interest. His family are settled in London. They won't have to move. Still gets a London club, a big London club in Arsenal. Works for all parties. Frank Lampard will be the happiest out of everyone because he hasn't got a disgruntled player in his dressing room. He's got a player who he's moved on to another club, albeit a rival.
I suppose maybe that's the refreshing thing that we see when we're going to come on to discuss other transfers in the course of what we've seen in the transfer window. But we're now used to protracted, long, drawn-out affairs. It seemed David Luiz had a discussion, said, I'm not having this. Next minute he's across London, and it's got sorted pretty quickly. So are we as surprised at the fact and the speed of it, really, that as much as anything else, the fact that he's gone from Chelsea to Arsenal?
Very surprised by it. Surprised by, if you look at, 80 million for Harry Maguire, then you look at something like 8 million for David Luiz, and the amount of titles that he's won and the amount of trophies he's won. There was a rumour, I don't know how true it is, but there's a rumoured fallout with Lampard when he was a player at Chelsea, so whether or not perhaps he felt as though he wouldn't be able to play with the same discipline and character that he maybe wants from his team, or maybe wants as a style of play. We were talking earlier, myself and Tim, about how sometimes with clubs, let's say Chelsea had kept David Luiz and he hadn't moved on. Sometimes that business can have more of an impact on your team moving forward. If you've got players, like you say, about being disgruntled and players that felt they were going to move and are now stuck there, particularly if those players are not going to play regularly, sometimes that can have a massive effect on the morale of a squad and the work you do as a manager.
Okay, you do mention money that's been spent in the transfer window, and there has been certainly some hefty transfers being paid over the course of what we've seen in the window. Quite obviously, the Harry Maguire one is top of the tree, standing out above everyone else, but that may be the most expensive one there, Tim. Is it the best one?
Is it the best one? I think the whole market got set by Manchester United signing Wan-Bissaka for 50 million. I think it sets a benchmark and moved the market for every other club within it. Harry Maguire is a good signing, in my opinion. He's one where Ole Gunnar Solskjaer can put his head down on the pillar at night and know what he's going to get on a Saturday afternoon from Harry Maguire, because he's proven in the Premier League. He knows he can play international football. He's a leader-type qualities. He's certainly better than what they have at the moment, but it's an awful lot of money. That is not Harry Maguire's fault, the price tag. It's not any of them players' faults, but it comes with added pressure. Comes with added pressure. He's the most expensive defender in the history in the Premier League now, taking on from Van Dijk. Van Dijk dealt with it last year. He did very well. He dealt with it, so Harry has to do exactly the same for one of the biggest clubs, if not the biggest club.
Gary, for you, who stands out?
Yeah, I think if you look at that, one of the interesting ones for me is Cancelo to Man City. Plays as a right back, can play more attacking, a little bit further forward. When you see that signing for 60 million, it just makes you wonder whether that means Kyle Walker perhaps will play less of a prominent role next season. I'm sure he'll still, fight in all the trophies that they'll be fighting. They'll need that competition, but it's a really, really interesting signing. The Man United ones for me, 130 million for Wan-Bissaka and Maguire. That's a huge outlay, and when you look at Man United, I just felt from an outsider looking in, maybe they needed to sign more players to have more of an impact on their squad. They've got very few goals. If you look last season, their top scorer I think was Pogba on 13 goals. So I'm a little bit surprised that with Lukaku going out, that maybe they didn't sign a main striker moving forward.
I think it's wrong for us not to mention Pepe. It's 72 million. Arsenal have really pushed the boat out there. This kid is a tremendous ability, fantastic player. But the reason we don't highlight that is because they need so much more, and it's defensively where they need it. We know they've got firepower, we know they've got goals, we know they've got pace, but this kid is a really exciting player for the Premier League for us all to enjoy.
Does that buy into what you were saying about the perhaps imbalance of the squad? Yeah. I mean, they've got an abundance of players that can create. It is 1,000,000%
a scattergun approach regarding recruitment at Arsenal, and they need to sort it out.
Is there any way that's a knee-jerk reaction to perhaps how the club was run under Arsene Wenger for such a long time?
Possibly, but they're not alone. A lot of the clubs need to set their stall out and see the philosophy they want to do moving forward. Liverpool are a great example of that. They've done nothing in this transfer window. They don't feel like they need to. Last year they had problems. They needed to address it. They got a goalkeeper. They addressed it. They got Van Dijk. They addressed it. Yeah, they didn't sign anyone this window because they don't feel like they need to. They don't feel there's anyone available to them who's going to improve them. They've got a lot of players coming back fit. Oxlade-Chamberlain comes back fit. Gomez, who's a huge player for them, who got injured early on last season. So at the moment, Liverpool feel like they're set. They're okay.
Well, they're set. We'll come on to them in a little bit more detail about how much they haven't actually spent. But from the point of view, you mentioned what Manchester United have done between Wan-Bissaka and Maguire. Unsurprisingly, that means that they're actually the biggest spenders over the course of the transfer window. But is it because they are Manchester United? Does that price get bumped up because suddenly Man United are interested in a particular player that you've got? Or is it a sign that they've gone, do you know what? We've spent a lot of time firefighting. We've spent a lot of time trying to answer critics to try and get people back on board. Ollie, here you go. Here's a ton of money. Do what you will with it.
Well, I think they had to. I think if you looked at last season, the way they finished the season, of course, when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer first went in, they had a tremendous time, but they finished the season very poorly. I think won one game out of the last 6. And I think there would have been a real first this season to start with some real positivity to kick them on into the new season. I still see the business they've done as being very difficult for them to break into that Liverpool-Man City realm, that extra quality that those two teams seem to have, an extra synergy. We spoke about them doing not so much business as they would normally do. But I think Man United had to do something. I just think that maybe there's a trust in some of the young players coming through. There's some good young players there and maybe he's going to give some of those a chance. But I think if you're Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, you have to start the season well, and obviously they probably had to pay that for Maguire, didn't they? If you think about the interest from elsewhere, rumoured to be from Man City, you're going to have to pay those levels. And I think we'd all say he's a very, very solid signing. Scoring goals from set pieces. He's got quality and composure on the ball. Be interesting to see how he does at the next level, a big club like that.
They've recouped half of that money back, almost more than half of that on Lukaku's sale. But for me, when you look at their squad, they're weaker without Lukaku. Mm-hmm. But Ollie knows his players. He knows what's coming through.
Well, I mean, does he know the players because of that youth coming through? Because, I mean, there's no doubt the sheer amount of goals that this player has scored in the Premier League is staggering.
Incredible.
We were discussing this earlier on, the fact that there's only Aguero and Harry Kane that are above him since August 2011, to me, is a staggering stat. When you look at what Aguero's probably won, how good Harry Kane's been, it's quite obviously going to leave a huge gap.
We always talk about Romelu, and we always look at, and we hear a lot of people talking about him and saying what he can't do. But actually, what he can do is score a 1 in 2.
Which is a phenomenal return for a Premier League.
It's a prolific goal-scoring record. And he's not always been at Manchester United when he's had that record. He's been at Everton, he's been at West Brom. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's played at lesser clubs as well, but he always scores goals. Now, I'm not sure how he doesn't fit into Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's plans, because for me, anyone who scores them goals, the game is about scoring goals and winning games. If you score that amount of goals, you have to fit into your side, because how can you deal without it? Because they're going to look for Rashford now to step up. His goal-scoring record is not great. I know he's still developing, but is he going to give you a Harry Kane season, where he's going to go out and score 25, 30 goals? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's just around the corner. Martial certainly has to step up. He's a bit part player. Sanchez, we've seen hardly anything of. We know how prolific he could be, but not to that extent. But we know how prolific he could be when he was at Arsenal. And they've got Greenwood, who's coming through, who's a great young talent. Perhaps he wanted to move on Lukaku for the philosophy of the football club to not block up a pathway of a very exciting young player who I'm sure we're going to see a lot of this year.
Well, I mean, that's both ends of the equation, isn't it, for Manchester United? But we've had a tweet in discussing the midfield, which has almost seemed to have got lost in the fog of them spending so much money on a defender, and obviously Lukaku dragging it out and eventually moving on to Inter Milan. Yes, they've kept Pogba, even though we know that perhaps European-wide things may still be able to move. But what they were known for, what that club was built on, was creative midfielders. And is there a dearth there now for Manchester United? Or do they just, as Tim was saying, players there that need to step up?
I think there's players there that need to step up. I was just going to say we also know how quick Lukaku is, because he showed us the stats online.
Everyone knows how quick.
Everyone knows that now. There's no hiding place. I think Man United to a certain degree, if Pogba is still there, which I imagine he will, because I can only imagine he would have moved on permanently if he was going to. Their season could well hinge on how, I don't want to say how motivated Paul Pogba is, because that would be unfair for me to say that. He was their top goal scorer and he was their top assist last season. But we know what an incredible player he can be. When he's really, at full throttle, you look at him and you think he could be the best midfielder in the world. And you always looked last season at times, and it was hard not to think that sometimes he looked a little bit demotivated with some of his performances and the energy he showed. So I think that's going to be a huge bearing on Man United's season, how Pogba feels and how he applies himself in this season. But I mean, there was talk about signing, was it Longstaff from Newcastle? We talked about some big figures with that. But I think other players have to step up, But there's not that many.
You wouldn't want to lose him, would you, Gary? You wouldn't want to lose Pogba now.
Well, you can't now.
The window's closed. You can't replace him.
No.
He's one of the best midfield players in the world.
Absolutely.
You cannot lose him. If I said to you before the window today, I said, who's the top 3 players at Manchester United? Yeah. Lukaku and Pogba will be in it.
Yeah. Do you feel he wants to be there, though?
If you was to lose them 2 players now, they would, no matter what they bring in, they're going to be weaker next season. Now, they're already weaker, in my opinion, because they've strengthened with Harry Maguire, great acquisition. They got rid of Lukaku, weakens them. If they get rid of Pogba, it weakens them. They cannot afford to get rid of this boy. They need to keep him at the club. You need to get your arm around him. You need to give him extra time. Whatever he needs, give it to him and get the best out of him, because you cannot replace him now.
I suppose the multi-million dollar question when it comes to Manchester United is, because of what they've spent, because of how last season finished, you said they've got to hit the ground running, but how long is that stretch of time if things don't go according to plan straight away?
Who knows? I think some of those teams, if you look at the fact that Arsenal, the fact that Tottenham, the fact that Man United have all spent heavily, of course Chelsea couldn't, but if you look at those teams, they are desperately trying to give the fans a glimmer of hope in terms of challenging for those top 2 spots. But I think it's going to be, personally, I just think it's going to be so difficult. I think out of all those teams, possibly Tottenham have got the best chance of breaking those two. But I just see Man City and Liverpool as being head and shoulders above the rest at this moment in time. I think Man United have to, listen, the fans dictate, but Man United have to be one of the top teams. And of course, we haven't seen that for, 18 months to 2 years. And just always seems to be a lack of synergy amongst that team. Doesn't there? Just doesn't seem to ever feel for the last 18 months as quite being a team, apart from probably that initial spell when Solskjaer went in.
What do you think the objective is at Manchester United?
Do you know what? I think it's, I still believe, and it sounds so stupid to say it, but it feels like a rebuild. It feels like to get that confidence back.
But if you're a player, Gary, you're going into Manchester United, and you as well, David. I mean, when the manager rings you and said, come into the football club, you're going to ask him, well, what are the objectives? Are we going to win the league? Are we looking at top four? Are we looking at Europa League? You're not going to attract the best players from all over the world if you say, well, we're looking to sneak into the top four. It's Manchester United. They have to win. We have to be winning the Premier League, and we have to challenge him for Champions League next season and winning the Champions League next season. As much as how ridiculous it sounds from how far they are away at the moment, it's Manchester United. We've been brought up with this team, what is a serial winning football club. Yeah. And unless they get back to that, they will never, ever get the top players to their football club. They've got top players there at the moment. That's why they cannot afford to let them go. Just let one go today. I can't see why.